Good afternoon, everyone. So we'll be discussing pulmonary hypertension in brief today and what has changed in the recent times in terms of treatment and diagnosis. So pulmonary hypertension, as we know, earlier used to be defined as mean pulmonary artery pressure of more than 25 millimeters of mercury with right heart catheterization. Now, as per the 6th World Symposium, which happened in 2018, they decided that we'll decrease the cutoff value of mean pulmonary artery pressure to more than 20 millimeters of mercury instead of 25. The reason being very simple, that this 25 millimeters of mercury was an arbitrary value and it was not taken based on any randomized trials. And they found that people who fall in this gray zone of 20 to 25 millimeters of mercury, later on in life, they developed severe pulmonary hypertension if they were not followed up. Hence, they decided to decrease it to 20 millimeters of mercury. And now the hemodynamic classification of pulmonary hypertension, as we know, is pre-capillary, post-capillary and combined. So pre-capillary will always be defined with mean pulmonary artery pressure of less than 20 millimeters of mercury as normal and more than 20 as pulmonary hypertension, with pulmonary capillary wedge pressure of less than 15 and pulmonary vascular resistance of 3. The isolated post-capillary pulmonary hypertension will have a pulmonary vascular resistance of less than 3. Why we are stressing on the isolated post-capillary pulmonary hypertension, we'll see later on in the slides. So a quick review on the mechanisms which are basically involved. There is persistent vasoconstriction, vascular remodeling, in situ thrombosis and arterial wall stiffness. These are the 5 major mechanisms which cause pulmonary hypertension. So persistent vasoconstriction will lead to medial hypertrophy with increase in number of size of smooth muscles. Basically, there will be proliferation because of vasoconstriction. Hypoxia will result in proliferation of smooth muscles and loss of the capillary collapsibility and expansibility. Similar thing will happen with vascular remodeling, where there will be smooth muscle proliferation and migration and plexiform dilatation of the pulmonary arteries. In situ thrombosis, we know, will result from an inflammatory cascade, which will result in intra-arterial thrombosis and arterial wall stiffness because of extracellular matrix proliferation, which will result in decreased compliance, which is mainly seen in connective tissue disease-related pulmonary hypertension. So what has changed in the updated classification of the pulmonary hypertension? So till now, we were following Dana Point classification, which was given to us in 2008, a brilliant classification to identify people of pulmonary hypertension and which group they fall in. So what has changed in this, as we know that earlier group 4 pulmonary hypertension, which we used to know as CTPH, chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension, was only taken as group 4. But now any tumor, malignant, non-malignant, or any arteritis or congenital pulmonary artery stenosis, which is directly blocking the pulmonary artery, will be considered as class 4 pulmonary hypertension. This is only for academic purpose. Treatment wise, there's not much change to it. Other thing which we should know, something new which has been added, that is pulmonary hypertension seen in long-term responders to calcium channel blockers. Now, what is that? We'll see in the next slide. So we all know what is acute vasoreactivity. That is reduction in mean pulmonary artery pressure of more than 10 millimeters of mercury and absolute value of pulmonary artery pressure reaching less than 40. Now, what happens is that some people who have been given calcium channel blockers from a long time, they are called responders if with calcium channel blockers, their WHO functional class of pulmonary hypertension has come down to class 1 and class 2. And on echo, we are seeing constant hemodynamic improvement in 1 year. Every 4 months, we are doing an echo and we are seeing that constantly the patient is improving who has been on calcium channel blockers. If this group of patients later on develop pulmonary hypertension, they'll be classified as pulmonary hypertension in long-term calcium channel blocker responders, and they'll be classified in group 1 pulmonary hypertension. Drugs which we need to know clearly, which we can see in our practice, the aminorex and anorexic genetic drugs, thanks to them that pulmonary hypertension developed to the level which we are seeing today. We got so much attention because these drugs cause the main fury of pulmonary hypertension developing in a lot of people. What we need to be aware of, especially in young adults, because of the increased rampant use of drugs, is the methamphetamines, amphetamines, cocaine. These are very common causes for pulmonary hypertension because of drugs. and one more alkylating agents, which we are using for chemotherapy, and leflunomide, which we are using for rheumatoid arthritis. All of these need to be kept in mind when we are dealing with any patients for pulmonary hypertension. Now, coming to diagnosis. So all the modalities which are used in diagnosis will help us in aiding the diagnosis, but always remember the gold standard for diagnosis is right heart catheterization. That is the thing that is going to give us the final diagnosis of pulmonary arterial hypertension. So on X-ray, as we can see dilated pulmonary artery with prominent descending pulmonary artery and prominent hilum, and pruning of the peripheral arteries. What do we mean by pruning is, this is an image which is showing a normal pulmonary vasculature. With idiopathic pulmonary hypertension in 6 months, you can see the thinning of the arteries that have happened. That is what we can see in X-rays in the periphery when the arteries become very thin. Similarly, ECG, no need to explain, right ventricular hypertrophy with right axis deviation and peaked P waves. CT scan, what do we see? Where whenever we have to measure pulmonary hypertension on CT scan, it is to be taken at the bifurcation of the pulmonary artery. This is the cross-sectional area which has to be taken. If the cross-sectional area of this bifurcation of pulmonary artery is more than 29 millimeters, we can consider it as a pulmonary hypertension. Or if the cross-section area of this pulmonary artery diameter and the cross-section of this ascending aorta, the ratio of that is more than 1 in favor of pulmonary artery, we'll consider it as pulmonary hypertension. Okay, so the transverse diameter of main pulmonary artery measured at the widest portion, which is near the level of bifurcation, has to be more than 29 millimeters, and pulmonary artery diameter to diameter of aorta has to be more than 1, which will be suggestive of pulmonary hypertension. Now, echo, I don't think I need to explain that much to all you seniors there, but what I'll try to focus is what has been updated in the echo measurement for pulmonary hypertension. So as we can see, we measure basically the TR jet velocity, and with the help of the TR jet velocity, we calculate the right ventricular systolic pressure or the pulmonary artery systolic pressure. Now, what is the problem with that? The problem is that this right ventricular systolic pressure or the pulmonary artery systolic pressure is a estimated value, which we are getting from this TR jet velocity. So because of this estimation which we are doing, the pulmonary artery systolic pressure measurement can vary plus minus 10 millimeters of mercury from what we measure at right heart catheterization. That's the amount of difference which we can see if we take pulmonary artery systolic pressure as the value to diagnose pulmonary hypertension. So the new symposium which has happened in the 6th symposium, what they have mentioned is that it is better that we only take the TR jet velocity and classify pulmonary hypertension based only on the TR jet velocity and not on the pulmonary artery systolic pressure velocity. So if our TR jet velocity is less than 2.8 meters per second, pulmonary hypertension is less likely. If it is more than 3.4 meters per second, it is highly likely that the patient may develop pulmonary hypertension. Now, what happens to the people who fall between this, between 2.8 to 3.4? That is the area where we need to look at other signs which we can see on echo. So what are the other signs which have been mentioned? Right ventricle to left ventricle diameter of more than 1, flattening of the interventricular septum with left ventricle eccentricity index of more than 1.1, right ventricle outflow Doppler acceleration time of less than 105 meters per second with mild systolic notching, early diastolic pulmonary regurgitation velocity of more than 2.2 meters per second, pulmonary artery diameter directly measuring on echo of more than 25 mm, or dilated IVC of more than 21 mm with collapsibility of less than 50%. So these are the other echocardiographic findings which we will take into account if the patient is falling in any gray zone between 2.8 to 3.4 of TR jet velocity. So now based on echo, we can classify them into low, intermediate or high probability of developing pulmonary hypertension. So low will be patient who has a TR jet velocity of less than 2.4 and does not have any additional signs on echo, which we discussed right now. Flattening of the septum, pulmonary artery diameter, dilation of IVC. If it is more than 3.4, we don't need any other echo findings. It is definitely pulmonary hypertension. If it is lying somewhere between 2.8 to 3.4, if the patient has symptoms or other echocardiographic findings, we'll label it as intermediate in developing pulmonary hypertension. So why are we doing this low, intermediate, and high? What is the reason for it? The reason being, now they have classified which patients actually require right heart catheterization. So if your probability is low, that is your TR jet velocity is less than 2.8, and you don't have any symptoms which can suggest pulmonary hypertension, you don't need to do in right heart catheterization. You only have to do echo follow-up if patient starts to develop symptoms. Similarly, if based on echo, your findings, you are getting something which is intermediate probability, which is TR jet of 2.8 to 3.4 and has other echo findings. If the patients have no symptoms, you will only follow up with echo. If patient is symptomatic, you have to do right heart catheterization. And if patient is on a high probability, that is TR jet velocity of more than 3.4, you need to do a right heart catheterization. There is no question about it. Now, when we classify them, depending on that, we have done the right heart catheterization. Now we know that the patient has pulmonary hypertension. Now we need to know what is the risk of him developing a severe disease and how much chances are there for him to die soon within 1 year. And depending on that, we can decide on the treatment. So the risk stratification of pulmonary hypertension, as we see, are based on multiple things. There are clinical criteria, signs of right heart failure, progression of symptoms, syncope, the functional class, 6-minute walk test distance, cardiopulmonary exercise testing, NT-proBNP level, echocardiographic findings, which we have discussed, and hemodynamics based on right heart catheterization. So depending on all these findings, we'll classify them into low risk, who have less than 5% chance of mortality within 1 year, intermediate of 5 to 10% chance, and high risk who have more than 10% chance of dying with pulmonary hypertension in 1 year. Why are we doing it? Because our treatment options will vary depending on which risk category the patient is falling into. So if we look at the treatment options which are available to us, first we'll look at the oral drugs. The oral drugs are endothelin receptor antagonists, which are bosentan, ambrisentan, macitentan. Phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitor, which are sildenafil and tadalafil. The new which has come, guanylate cyclase inhibitor, riociguat. This is one drug which is prescribed for chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension and idiopathic pulmonary hypertension, and has shown great results in patent 1 and patent 2 trial, and calcium channel blockers with diltiazem, nifedipine, and amlodipine, which has to be given in higher dose. Diltiazem, as we know, it can go up to 900 mg per day, and nifedipine can go up to 240 mg per day, starting from 30 mg per day, as per the tolerance of the patient. And amlodipine, if we decide to give, we have to give it 20 mg daily instead of 10 mg, which is the regular dose for systemic hypertension.
Necessary to do other reactive tests, doctor?
Yes, sir.
Before giving calcium channel blocker, is it essential?
Vasoreactivity has to be tested, sir. Without vasoreactivity, if the patient is it is vasoreactive, then only we can give calcium channel blockers. Otherwise, no.
So how do you do this test?
Through right heart catheterization, we give nitric oxide, inhaled nitric oxide, and we see what is the change in the pulmonary artery pressure. If the pulmonary artery pressure is changing by 10 millimeters of mercury, or if your mean pulmonary artery pressure is only coming down to less than 40 millimeters of mercury, then we can say that the patient is vasoreactive.
Mm-hmm. So that means you have to do a cath, right?
Cath has to be done, sir. Cath has to be done. To classify pulmonary hypertension, to diagnose it, confirm it, cath has to be done. Right. Even after echo. So the other group of drugs are the intravenous, inhaled, oral, and subcutaneous. So intravenous, we know epoprostenol, which was the first drug developed for pulmonary hypertension, also known as the wonder drug for pulmonary hypertension, because the trial showed that it decreased mortality by 50% in patients who used to be sick with pulmonary hypertension. Treprostinil, Eloprost, inhaled is the Eloprost and treprostinil. I'm not sure. So treprostinil we get, Eloprost I'm not too sure about in India. Oral, it's not available here in India, which is Beroprost and Eloprost, and subcutaneous. Now, out of this, as a pulmonologist, we really focus on the inhaled prostacyclin analogs. The reason being, apart from group 1, which is primary pulmonary hypertension or idiopathic pulmonary hypertension, all these drugs which we are discussing cannot be given to the patients. Patients with left heart disease, patients with lung disease will not receive these drugs. Apart from this inhaled iloprost or treprostinil, which is recently being tried in COPD patients and ILD patients and has shown to improve the pulmonary artery pressure. Why we don't give these drugs in especially lung patients who are having a chronic respiratory disease? Because these drugs will result in pulmonary vasodilation, which will result in ventilation perfusion mismatch, which we don't want in those patients. So it will be more harmful than beneficial to giving oral or IV drugs to such patients. That's why the inhaled route is being tried in them, which has shown some good results, but the trials are still ongoing on it. Now, the combination treatment. What we should know that what is approved and what is not recommended. So not recommended is combining riociguat with any phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitor like sildenafil or tadalafil. It is going to cause severe hypotension, and it's going to be very, very dangerous for the patient. Similarly, sildenafil and bosentan should not be combined. It has shown to have more adverse effects. The drugs which are combined and have shown very good results, the first combination which came in market was tadalafil and ambrisentan, which is known as Endoblock T as a brand name. Then recently sildenafil and macitentan, which our patient Samreen was on. And if we have to give with an IV combination, we give it treprostinil with bosentan or sildenafil. So now we know the drugs which are used. Now we have to figure out which patients will receive what kind of drugs. So before that, we need to see what can be done for all patients blanketly for pulmonary hypertension. So that is the supportive care. First thing is we have to restrict the fluid. We have to prevent right ventricular failure, and we have to prevent the load which is being given on the right ventricle. Supplemental oxygen for patients who have a PaO2 of less than 60 millimeters of mercury. Anticoagulation, no clear evidence, but can be given in idiopathic pulmonary hypertension, is strictly contraindicated in patients who have scleroderma. You don't give anticoagulation. It has shown to have increased mortality in those group of patients. And we always keep the blood hemoglobin level at 9 and not less than that in these patients. So we have to correct the anemia. Use of angiotensin receptor blockers, ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, or ivabradine are not recommended on a routine basis in patients with pulmonary hypertension. Similarly, vasoreactive testing is indicated only for group 1 pulmonary hypertension patients, which is idiopathic pulmonary hypertension, heritable pulmonary hypertension, or pulmonary hypertension due to toxin and drugs. Now, depending on what we stratified these patients as, low risk group with low chances of having mortality in 1 year and high risk group will decide on the treatment. If they are low risk group and do not have much symptoms, which is they fall in WHO functional class 1, you can only start one single drug, that is monotherapy. Now, starting calcium channel blocker will depend on vasoreactivity. Otherwise, endothelin receptor antagonists, phosphodiesterase 5 inhibitor, any one drug can be started and gradually titrated up. But if patient is symptomatic with WHO functional class 2 or 3, you have to start on a combination regimen, which we saw right now, ambrisentan tadalafil combination or macitentan with sildenafil combination. And patients who are on intermediate risk group will also be requiring a combination treatment. Similarly, patients who are high risk, who have more than 10% chance of dying within 1 year, you have to start them on IV therapy. That is epoprostenol, which is the first choice. If they are not improving with that, you combine the IV drugs with oral drugs and refer them for lung transplantation. Now,
does it cost epoprostenol?
Yes, sir.
How much does it cost? Has the cost come down or still very expensive?
It's still expensive, sir. It has come down from what it was before, but it's still expensive.
How much does it cost now?
I'm not too sure, sir, what exactly is the cost at
And it has to be given as an IV drip or something?
It has to be given as an infusion.
The administration also is not easy, right?
It's not easy, sir. It's not easy. We have to see a lot of side effects might be there. That's why it is only reserved for people who are not improving with oral drugs and are at the verge of very severe disease and requiring lung transplant. That is the level where they have reached. So we start the IV therapy. So as we stated earlier, patient who are started on calcium channel blockers, even based on vasoreactivity testing, have to be followed every 3 to 4 months with echocardiography and, if possible, right heart catheterization, because we need to make sure they always are improving. If you don't see any improvement on patients with calcium channel blockers, you have to replace calcium channel blockers with the other oral drugs which are available to us. Well, now we saw the combination treatment, IV treatment, and monotherapy. There are certain group of patients who you cannot give anything but monotherapy, and it's risky to combine or even give the IV drugs, especially patients who are older age of more than 75 years and have some left heart disease. They are at.
Do you give anticoagulants along with your sildenafil?
Only, it's not a clear indication, sir. Only in idiopathic pulmonary hypertension, it can be given. But if you are too sure that it is not related to connective tissue disease, especially scleroderma, because there, if you give anticoagulants, it is more harmful than it is beneficial. I'll continue, sir. So idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension with age of more than 75 years and have risk factors for left heart disease, you preferably only give him monotherapy. Patients with pulmonary veno-occlusive disease or pulmonary capillary hemangiomatosis, you continue only monotherapy. It is very, very important. We'll see in next slides why it is important to give only monotherapy to them and rather be on the very cautious side in giving any anti-pulmonary hypertension drugs to these group of patients. And patients who have uncorrected congenital heart disease, who have portopulmonary hypertension or HIV. This is based only on trial. It's not experience or it's not any theoretical reason. The reason being for patients of portopulmonary hypertension or HIV to be started only on monotherapy is that when the combination trials were going on, these group of patients were not included in those trials. So they don't know what will happen to these group of patients if they are given a combination therapy. Now the surgical options, the end option is the heart-lung transplant. That is one thing which you have to offer to patients who are with severe pulmonary hypertension, rapidly deteriorating, not improving with any drugs. You have to offer them heart-lung transplant. Pulmonary endarterectomy is for patients who have chronic thromboembolic pulmonary hypertension, mainly in the main pulmonary artery. Segmental pulmonary artery, it's difficult to do pulmonary endarterectomy. And balloon arterial septostomy, to decrease the pressure of right heart, we make an artificial shunt. Now, some quick words on PVOD and PCH. Why are we stressing on pulmonary veno-occlusive disease and pulmonary capillary hemangiomatosis? Because though it is idiopathic pulmonary arterial hypertension, it behaves very differently from other groups of pulmonary hypertension. So, as we see, this is the problem of the pulmonary vein and the pulmonary capillaries. There is no problem in the pulmonary artery. The problem in the pulmonary artery is happening because of the back pressures from the pulmonary vein and the pulmonary capillary. So it is a genetic cause, most likely the mutation in EIF2AK4 gene. Other risk factors include chemotherapy agents, autoimmune diseases like sarcoid, LCH, and Hashimoto's thyroiditis, and tobacco smoke exposure. It is very rare, 1 to 2 cases per million patients, but we need to have an eye for it because the diagnosis, as we see, where do we suspect that patients might have PVOD or PCH is if patient of pulmonary hypertension is coming to you with hemoptysis or they develop pleural effusion which is hemorrhagic. You suspect that this group of patients can have pulmonary veno-occlusive disease or pulmonary capillary hemangiomatosis. Similarly, on spirometry, if their DLCO is significantly low, less than 50%, they are desaturating more on exercises compared to a patient who you have seen for a normal pulmonary hypertension, you have to suspect PVOD and PCH. Now, the interesting part is the CT scan, because if we look at the CT scan, it looks like an infection. They will have ground glass opacities, they will have mediastinal adenopathies, and they will have interlobular septal thickening. So the CT will look something like this. We can see the mediastinal adenopathy here. We can see the dilated pulmonary artery here. All these things which are there in the periphery, these small lines which we can see, They are all the curly B lines in the interlobular septal thickening, which we can see. So this can easily pass off as an acute infection with ground glass opacity, which is there, or even a normal CT. So we have to be very, very vigilant when we are seeing a PVOD or PCH patient to have a look at all this and make a diagnosis that it is possible to have that the patient is suffering from PVOD or PCH. So this is what the curly B lines look like, and this is what a sagittal section of the CT will look like. It is not normal. It looks a little hazy. It has a lot of nodules and interlobular septal thickening. Some people might have labeled this as miliary TB also, and treated the patient for tuberculosis when the patient was having PVOD and PCH. So the treatment, why we are stressing on it? Because the treatment as per this is general supportive measures is okay. Like correction of hypoxemia, prevent further progression of hypoxic vasoconstriction. Anticoagulation here is important. We have to give anticoagulation because in situ thrombosis of pulmonary vasculature is very common in pulmonary veno-occlusive disease. So these patients are the group of patients who will require anticoagulation along with antipulmonary hypertensive drugs. Now, the problem with antipulmonary hypertensive drugs in this group of patients is because it is not an arterial problem and a venous and a capillary problem. Because it is a venous problem and a capillary problem and not an arterial problem, if we give the pulmonary hypertension drugs, which are pulmonary vasodilators, the problem which will happen is that they might develop life-threatening pulmonary edema. So we have to be very cautious when we are treating patients with PVOD and PCH to give very low dose of pulmonary hypertensive drugs and see whether they are improving or not, or whether they get life-threatening pulmonary edema with it or not. So we have to be very cautious in that. And immunosuppressive therapy is important in these group of patients because we saw one cause is genetic. One of the major causes for PVOD and PCH is the autoimmune disorders, which is sarcoidosis, LCH, and Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So if that is there in the background, if you suspect that is there, you have to start them on immunosuppressive therapies. These patients will actually benefit from these group of therapies. So the take-home message for us will be, we need to thoroughly investigate for classifying pulmonary hypertension because we need to know which group they fall in to give them a treatment and risk stratify them to know which combination therapy, monotherapy, what will they require. Early diagnosis and treatment is very crucial. We have to monitor the TR jet velocity and not the pulmonary artery systolic pressure to select patients wisely for mono or combination therapy. And we have to keep a high index of suspicion for pulmonary veno-occlusive disease or pulmonary capillary hemangiomatosis. Thank you.
Very nice presentation. Excellent.
Very nice.
Very well done, Dr. Rai.
Very well. I wish you could gone a little slower and imbibe more.